Conversations in History with the Michigan High School Lacrosse Coaches Association. Hall of Fame, we're talking with Brighton head coach and 2023 inductee, Jim Carl, the infamous Jim Carl. Jim, first of all, congratulations on being inducted, a long time coming and certainly deserving more than most. So congratulations on being inducted into the Hall. And I guess, what's your thoughts when somebody called you?
Well, it's humbling. I look at the list of people that are in there, and you wonder whether you've really risen to that level. I mean, yourself included. And I haven't really coached that long, 15 years. But I'm honored to have been considered. I was honored to be nominated, and I'm humbled to be selected.
Well, Jim, the easiest part of these conversations, we're going to start right at the beginning, kind of do the chronological ladder, if you will. And I'm going to take you all the way back to Saginaw Arthur Hill. And you graduated from Saginaw Arthur Hill. You were a swimmer. And talk a little bit about what it's like growing up in Saginaw. Because as you pointed out in the beginning of this, lacrosse didn't come till a little bit later.
Yeah, it really didn't. I was a swimmer. I played all the sports as a kid. I was just not really the athlete that I ever wanted to be at a Class A school. And I ended up by not making the hockey team. I ended up as a swimmer. In Saginaw, there was a middle school or a junior high school and a high school. So, ninth grade was in a completely different building. There was nobody on varsity teams as freshmen. So, I got cut from the hockey team in 10th grade, and the swim coach kind of took me in, and I ended up swimming for him for 3 years, and it was a great experience. I mean, for me, I've had a lot of really great mentors in my life from a coaching perspective, and he's really remains the gold standard for me. I mean, he's everything that I would hope to be as a coach.
What'd you swim? What discipline?
I was a distance freestyler. I could swim. I could swim really anything. I wasn't a real good sprinter, but I swam distance freestyle. I could swim the IM. I was captain, but I was not even the best guy on the team. So we had a pretty good squad. I think Saginaw had a run of many years of winning the Valley, which back then the Valley was the league for most sports. Our football program was solid. Our track and field out of Saginaw or Saginaw High was tremendous. And I ended up I enjoyed it a lot. I mean, I wasn't great at it, but I was okay.
I keep thinking of Pontiac Central in their heyday when they were part of the Saginaw Valley. If you think of Charlie Cole as the basketball coach at Saginaw, all those teams, they used to draw 3,000, 5,000, 6,000 people in a basketball game on a Friday night coming down here and playing in this. It certainly was the premier high school league in maybe the 60s and 70s for sure.
Yeah, I think it was for a long time. I don't really know. I think they still play pretty good ball up there, but back in that day, from that 73 football team on, there was some pretty great teams.
You went to a school that had a pretty iconic coach in George Eiler too. George was, if you know
we
anything about
did.
football, if you don't know that name from a high school perspective, you don't know much about high school football.
Yeah, my brother played on the team that won the state championship, and Eiler came in when they were maybe, I don't really know, I was younger, but I think they were sophomores when he came in and really overhauled the system. And I may be biased, but in my mind, it's probably the greatest high school football team to ever play. I mean, they were loaded,
And there are several.
I mean, they didn't get scored on. I don't really know their history, but I know their senior year they didn't get scored on. They were undefeated. I think they only lost one game their entire career, and that was as juniors. I want to say against Bay City Central.
When the Free Press reminisces about the greatest high school teams of all time, all sports, they're still considered in there. They're always in the top 5 of some level at some point.
Yeah.
That was,
Yeah,
think about
as they
not being
should be.
scored upon in high school for an entire season, not being scored upon. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was a pretty strong league. So, there were a lot of teams that came close, but at the end of the day, nobody scored on them. So
for sure. From Saginaw, Arthur Hill all the way to East Lansing, and you decided, what made you
Yep.
decide to go to Michigan State?
Well, I was originally pre-vet, and my mom or my dad went to Michigan State. Um, just kind of everything kind of fell into place. I fell in love with the school. I originally was going to go to Kalamazoo College, and um, I just couldn't afford it at the time. I mean, I don't know what it is now, but back then it was significantly more than what Michigan State was. So I ended up at Michigan State. I was in a residential college there called Lyman Briggs, and I loved it. I made great friends. I'm still friends with a lot of those guys today. Um, so it was a great experience.
What'd you study at Michigan State?
I was a physiology major, and I went from there to into pharmaceuticals.
Well, before I get into the sales part of the pharmaceuticals, what is a physiologist? I mean, if you're a sophomore or junior studying physiology, what is it that what was you thinking about doing from a career standpoint?
You're thinking about either vet school or dental school or
Okay.
medical school, so you're kind of on that track. And um, for me, I was looking at dental school, but I ended up getting married. I had a house, I had a kid, and but I never got in until it was too late. So um,
So from there,
looking back, I wouldn't change anything. So
the pharmaceutical sales, that was the career. Am I correct? I have 25 years worth.
yeah, yeah, I've 25 years in pharmaceuticals, all with the same company. And I ended up in the Brighton area because at the time my wife was working for EDS in Southfield, and I was working in the Lansing area. So this area was kind of halfway for both of us.
What did you learn from sales that you used in coaching? Because as you mentioned, you didn't come to lacrosse, and we're going to get into that in a couple seconds. When you get into Gabriel Richard as your first coaching job, am I correct on that? If that was the first place?
Yeah, yeah,
What did you learn from sales that's translated into being a non-teaching coach? Because being a teacher is a whole nother animal.
it is. And I'm not sure I was ever designed to be a teacher, but I think there's a lot of skills that you develop as a salesperson. Everybody thinks the fallback position is sales, but when you really get down to it, it's as tough a job as anyone. But you learn to read people, you learn to read the room, you learn to plan, you learn to have vision, you do all the things that you need to do to be successful as a coach, for sure.
Okay. So you got the Michigan State, you got the career going. Where's the entry to the lacrosse, which is where we're honoring you for?
Yeah, well, my son was a baseball player, and he just got tired of baseball, and he ended up with some buddies that were going to a lacrosse camp, and they were starting a lacrosse league in Brighton, and I was that parent that would do anything they needed to do. I kept the stats, I'd set up the field, I'd take it down. I had no ability to help them coach those kids, but I was really just trying to provide an environment for my kid to grow and develop in. And the guy that started the program here is in the Hall of Fame. It's Greg Gustafson, and he did a great job with those youth. But at the time, I can't remember exactly what grade, but I would say they were in fifth or sixth grade. And when it came time to go to high school, we had made a decision as a family that we did not want our kids to go to Brighton, that we wanted them to go to the Catholic school in Ann Arbor.
Okay.
And my son went there, fighting the whole way, but he had an older sister that went there. It was a great experience for her and for our family. And, one thing led to another. I was the stat guy there as well. And then Ed Maloney, who it was the coach, ended up leaving, and the assistant coach took over and asked me to help. And I became the assistant coach the year that my son was a senior. And that was really my first time ever coaching anything.
So as a first year assistant, having not played the sport, and probably more a traditional athlete, meaning baseball, basketball, things we all played as kids, is it overwhelming at that point, or is it just you just chip away at it and figure out what goes through your mind as a brand new assistant coach with not a lot of background in the sport.
Well, you know, I had a little bit of confidence at the time, so I've been really competitive my whole life. I had thought, you know, so if you go back when my son was a freshman, I had had a heart attack. And I decided after that that I'd like to get more involved in some things. So I actually went to Ed Maloney and said, "Hey, you know, I don't know where I'm at or what I'd have to do, but I really love this sport." And Ed took me to a winter coaching conference put on by the association in Pontiac. And we had Caravana was there speaking, Petramala was there speaking. I can't remember who else was there, but there were a lot of big hitters in the game. And I of course, didn't know who any of those guys were.
Dom Zimmerman.
But yeah, I
Yeah,
don't know if he was there or not,
he
but there were
was.
there
No,
were
he
a
was
lot
that
of
year.
really
He was that year.
there were a lot of really great guys. And you know, I went, I just kind of soaked it all in, and Ed never asked me to come on staff. But when he left, the other guy, I mean, at the time at the Catholic school, and they'll take anybody, anybody that wants to help, you know. The game was still in its infancy, and you know, I had told them, "Hey, I'll move cones for you. I'll do whatever you need to do. I really just want the experience of my kid and all of his peer group to be positive." And to this day, I think it might be one of the best teams I've ever had. Had they had better coaching, they could have gone all the way. But you know, I was new. I mean, it was before YouTube. You know, when I before I got into coaching, I went to every clinic. I went to all 6 CAP programs from the MHSAA. I went to the thing, and then I went to U of M's practices every single night for like a year. I was there, you know, when I would go and listen to John Paul. He'd get in the locker room and kind of go through the practice plan and what the teaching points were, and the kids would come out, and I mean, it's a whole nother level. It's business. You know, we're here to win national championships. So, you know, I went most nights, but you know, all fall long, I went. So when I went into my first season, I, I felt pretty comfortable that I could either do what they were doing, or, you know, it's really amazing to me. You could just email them and say, "Hey, I'm struggling with this," you know, and it could be John Paul, it could be any of these big names, and they get back to me and say, "Hey, try this," and a lot of them would draw it up on a napkin and scan it in and email it to you. And you know, I don't think the kids ever thought I was a genius or anything, but I always came fairly prepared. And I always felt, you know, I grew up in a pretty athletic community. Lacrosse is just basketball. All of the drills that we do in lacrosse are pretty much stolen from basketball. You look at the West Jenny drill that everybody loves. I mean, it's a continuous 3v2 drill from the 50s. It's probably from Red Auerbach, you know.
You mentioned Michigan. We should point out that that was the Michigan in the club days when there's several years of being undefeated, one of the best club programs ever put together. And then obviously
Yeah.
John Paul had taken them into a varsity program. But in the days when you were watching them, they were an MCLA powerhouse and had, you know, unbelievable players. They were a great program. So it was something. It was a good a model to look at.
It was, and I don't think they randomly went from that club environment to Division One. I mean, I don't really know this, but I think John Paul was working so that when they did make that jump, he was ready to go and compete. I mean, they weren't just, it wasn't beer league lacrosse. I think John Paul ran that team like a typical Division One team. That was kind of my impression. But you know, I was there. I'd be all over the place. I'd be taking notes. I still have the notebooks of the time that I spent there, and I still, like, when I go to the national championship game, I try to go early enough to see the warm ups. I get as much out of the warm ups as I do out of the game. So yeah, it was so. You know, to go back to your original question, I just soaked up everything I could. I mean, I remember the days in the Catholic League. You know, well, I you were one of the first guys from the A level that played me, but I would go and watch the games between Ambrose and Sean Leary. I mean, they were both great coaches, and it was as competitive as anything you'd seen. I mean, I loved going to those games, and I would take whatever they did. I still do the same thing. I mean, I love to watch the game, and I'll go and watch Brother Rice Catholic Central, and I take something away every single time I go to a game.
You mentioned that you were confident, certainly in the beginning, and you were certainly well prepared from the kinds of things that you did from, I'm sure, sales. Did you ever, in that at Richard, did you ever feel like there was a point when you felt, I don't want to say felt adequate, because you can't coach a high school team and not feel reasonably adequate, but was there a time, how long did it take you to feel like, okay, I've got some clue. I'm 3 days ahead of the 17-year-olds.
I might not be there yet. I mean,
Okay.
I learn from everybody. I mean, I can go to a game between two winless teams and still take away something. And I've been really blessed at Brighton. I've got great assistant coaches. They're young kids. They're probably 30. They played in college. I learned something from them, and I don't know if they learned anything from me, but I think together we're a pretty good staff. So you know, I I've never really been completely confident that I've reached that I know everything I need to know. I think every time I see a game, whether it's on TV or in person, I'm trying to figure out how can that help me put my kids in the best position to win.
Then let me ask you a better question. Have you ever felt comfortable? And again, ongoing learning, and it's a process, and I get that. What do you know in terms of a time frame when you finally felt comfortable enough that you weren't looking over your shoulder and second guessing yourself?
No, I think I'm still there. I'm still,
Okay. Okay.
you know, I mean, I'm confident, but yet I'm willing to continue to learn.
Okay.
The expectation at FGR. So if you look at the two places that I coached at, the expectations were very different. So when I got into coaching at FGR, athletics are really an afterthought there. They're really trying to develop kids on a completely different track, and athletics is really an afterthought for them. And so I could have lost every game if I'd have kept those kids and guided those kids in the right direction. I don't think they'd have ever been unhappy with me. I'm not so sure that's the case in Brighton. I think Brighton still wants to win, but Brighton is all about winning the right way. And so, they're very different environments to coach, but not so much. They also have some similarities where, they're very much alike as well.
You were at uh, Gabriel Richard how long?
I think 7 years.
Okay. How did Brighton come about?
Well, uh, when I was coaching at Richard, I really felt strongly that we needed to have a JV program. So I got involved with JV football. And my son played football for Richard. And because the lacrosse coach left, they didn't have a head football coach 1 or 2 weeks prior to his senior football season. So we hired this guy. He came in as the interim coach. He took him to the playoffs for the first time in X number of years. And I ended up becoming the lacrosse coach and asking to be involved in football because I wanted to recruit kids to come out for lacrosse in the spring. Coach Lemons took the Brighton job, and I came with him for football. So I began to develop a relationship with the kids in Brighton. I was still coaching lacrosse at Gabriel Richard, and the opening came up. Gabriel Richard was kind of looking at the time to go in a different direction with lacrosse, and it just made sense that I interviewed with John Thompson, and I just felt lucky to be able to be considered. and I not only love coaching there, but I live here, and my kids grew up here, and my kids started playing lacrosse here as well. So that's kind of how I transitioned. I really came to Brighton because I was here anyway for football, and I remain a football coach. So
What do you like about Brighton?
you know, we have an enormous community commitment to facilities. You'd be hard pressed to find a better facility, and everybody, all of the coaches are really committed to not only winning, but winning the right way, and developing and forming kids um, in the right direction. We don't always succeed. We have some kids that as a coaching staff we struggle with, but for the most part, you can work with all of those people on kind of the same, the same line that John's got kind of a mission and a blueprint of what we're trying to provide our kids, and I think we all pretty much follow it pretty closely. But it's just a great community with great facilities and great kids and great families.
You mentioned that, Brighton's trying to do it the right way. Do you assume everybody else does it the right way or tries to do it the right way?
I do. I think everybody has their different perspective of what the right way is.
Right.
I think there are a lot of teams and programs, or there's this blur between the high school environment and the club environment that kind of blurs that line to the extent that you've got a foot in each side of that. But I do believe in my heart that everybody's trying to do the right things for kids. And I think what's right for kids is changing and evolving. And, sometimes the MHSAA is out in front of that, and sometimes they're not, just depending on what their perspective is. I, I know there's a lot of noise in our sport about people breaking the rules, not breaking the rules. I think in the end, when you really get down to it, the vast majority of our coaches are following the rules and doing the right thing for their kids.
While at Brighton, like everything else, you get involved in more than just your own program and your own community. You decided to take an administrative role as a part of the sport, as a part of the coaching association, and was for, I believe, 7 years. The head
7 or 8.
7 or 8 years as the president of the Michigan High School Lacrosse Coaches Association, which this Hall of Fame is sponsored by. And is that just something you grew up with? Is giving back as part of that ethos in terms of its process?
Yeah, I don't know if I consciously grew up with it, but I'm aware of how many people helped provide me an experience that was positive as a kid. I mean, I go back to my swim coach. I mean, he really was a guy that did everything for everybody that swam for him. And I don't know. I think it's part of my makeup. I mean, I'm willing to help do anything. I think see in our world today where people are quick to complain, and I just that falls off my back until so I never complain unless I'm willing to be a part of the solution. And everybody can complain and and tell you what the problems are, but when push comes to shove, are you one of the people that are trying to solve the problem? So I always tried to be one of those guys that stepped up and tried to help solve problems that everybody knew existed.
I asked the question because if you follow the Hall of Fame interviews, there's that Pied Piper in every community who's, he's picking up equipment, or he started it from this, or he's in the rain. There's one guy. There's one guy in Belleville. There's one guy in Brighton. There's one guy in Oxford. There's one guy in Grand Rapids, and so on and so forth. And I went back and I looked at some of the Hall of Fame guys. And I looked at the last 20 that we've inducted, and surprisingly, there's only about 20% of that inductees that made lacrosse a for-profit job in terms of summer programs and those kinds of things. So charity is a real part of the guys that at least have been inducted in this problem. That's the one sort of thread that goes through that. By being the president of the coaching association and doing all the things that you brought to the sport, buses to guys going all the way to the convention. That was, certainly not normal. And you had a big impact. You had as much impact as an administrator as you have as a coach.
Yeah, I think a lot of that goes back you got to go all the way back. I married well, so I
Okay.
have a wife that has a really giving heart, and she's got her own things that are important to her. For me, I've always approached, and I haven't always been successful, but I approach coaching as kind of a ministry. It's a way to reach kids, and to kind of guide them and supplement or collaborate with parents and teachers and faculty and all of that. And I think we get lost in the fact that it's all about winning and losing. And when you take a step back and look at, you're trying to produce young men of quality and of high character, that you've got to be one of those guys that helps out and improves that environment for kids to thrive in.
When you're sitting in a chair late at night with your wife on the back porch, sipping that favorite beverage, is there an anecdotal story that sticks out over others? Is there something that in your mind is just, kind of warms your heart a little bit personally?
Yeah, probably one that I use often is, if you go way back, I think it would be fair to say that I'm a pretty competitive guy. And I come from a really competitive family. And I have a friend network from high school and college that was really competitive. So I still think the best contest I've ever been in is the contest, driveway basketball 2-on-2. And if I played one game, I played 1,000 with these three other guys. And um, I lost 999 of them, but I won the last one. So, so Snyder and I are the current champions for between Kretz and Weineke. But you know, it the competitive thing kind of goes on. I'm sorry, I forgot what the question even was. My
Was there
mind
a
went on a
lacrosse? Is
tangent.
there a lacrosse moment that sticks out
Yeah.
more than
So
most?
yeah, I'm sorry. So my wife came to me and said, I know you're competitive. I mean, to a T, you compete with everything. But if you could just see the way you're acting on the sideline and how it impacts how you are perceived by both the community and the kids. She was very adamant that you can't expect kids to treat refs respectfully when you're dressing them down for some of the dumbest stuff. And I started to look at that. And probably one of the things I'm most proud of as a coach is I've I've been awarded the sportsmanship trophy or award from the Officials Association 3 times. None of those were part of my early coaching days. It took me a long time to really get that whole perspective down, and it really was my wife that said, if you could just see how foolish you look on the sideline. And in the day of video, you can now go back and see some of those moments that are probably not my proudest moments as a coach.
So her voice resonated.
It does. It does. She doesn't speak often, but when she does, her statements carry pretty big weight.
We have a
And I
personal,
changed. I mean, I completely changed at that point. I mean, you will never see me yell at a ref. It just doesn't happen.
you and I have a personal relationship, and I say that for the point I'm about to make, which is that women have been instrumental in calming both of us down in different reasons and different points and different women. But we can learn a lot from them, as it were, because they're, I think, a lot smarter than we are. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Yeah, and really for me, one of the things that has been the most helpful for me is the support I get from my wife. I mean, I think everybody that coaches, whatever the sport is, it's an enormous time commitment and a sacrifice to the whole family. And you've really got to have a supportive spouse or significant other that is on board for the mission that you have as a coach. Because if you don't, it's a grind. And I've been really lucky. My wife, I got into it maybe for the wrong reasons. I was trying to help, my own kid, but my kid played with his group of kids who were, we love them all. and it just kind of steamrolled from there. And I don't know that I'd ever would have lasted as long as I did without the support of my wife, for sure.
I ask those questions because if you look at the guys who've made it to Hall of Fame, there's literally as a different a story for each person. We've had guys who were the greatest players ever. We've had guys like yourself who picked it up, sort of in younger middle life, if you will. So there's no specific blueprint to get you to helping, but that same Piper approach to things still is the one thread that I think ties it all together. The question I need to ask, and for those who know you, if it was lacrosse or fishing, in this case, stream fishing, is one love over another, or either, thank God they're in different seasons?
Well, they're not in different seasons. Hands down, if I had to ever choose between those two, I'd be a fisherman.
Okay.
It's not even close. I mean,
Okay.
it's so far away. So, I've been a fly fisherman my whole life. I think the guys that I fish with think that I spend way too much time coaching, because the good fishing in Michigan is in May and June. So I still make it up there. I used to go up 30, 40 nights a year, and I probably make it up 5 or 6 nights, but um it's probably not even close. If my wife ever forced me to make that decision, I'd be done coaching right now.
Okay. And I guess the last question is, what's left as we get closer to January, as the things start to heat up a little bit and we get through the holidays? What's left on the bucket list for 2023? And then what's on the larger bucket list? What's left that you seem to want to accomplish for your own career?
As we kind of ramp up, um, I'm not really ready to retire from coaching. I still, of all the sports I've ever been involved in, I love lacrosse. I don't think it's even close. I enjoy football. I enjoy being a part of that staff, and I learn a lot from the guys that I work with on that staff about what I want to do with my lacrosse team and what I don't want to do with my lacrosse team. So there's kind of a give and take. And I know in football, you've been a football coach, so there are a lot of internal coaching arguments that if you get in the offices, it it all isn't always real pleasant. But when they make it out to the field or to practice, every single guy is on the same page, whether they agree with the decision that was made or not. So I learned a lot from there. I'd like to coach. I'd like lacrosse to be the final sport that I coach. So, I don't know when that'll be. Right now, I still love the game, and my wife's really supportive of me continuing to be involved. And I'll coach as long as I think that number one, Brighton wants me, and number two, that I'm having fun. If you've coached, it's a grind. So it's from the middle of March till June with virtually no days off. So you got to really love being at the stadium and with the kids and watching them fail. And I got really great young coaches, and sometimes we have the same arguments in the lacrosse locker room, and sometimes they win, sometimes they don't, sometimes they know more than me, and sometimes that doesn't matter. So you know, so I don't know. I think I'd like to think that I have 5 or 6 more years left in coaching lacrosse. Um, I've tried to quit football for the last 5 years, but I keep getting every time I go in and quit, I get more responsibility and less pay. So, you know, I'm afraid to quit this year because I'm not sure what I'll end up doing. But, it's a really, I get a lot of crossover athletes. I don't have as many this year. I've had a run that very few high schools, I think, will have. I graduated over 20 kids for each of the last 4 years. So seniors that were graduating, and I run 2 varsity teams, so I'm able to backfill that. Um, I don't know where it is. I'd like to finish my career in Brighton. Um, and I don't even know if I want to be a head coach that whole time. I mean, I love being a head coach, but I've got really great young kids that are ready. And, I'm getting to that point where you say, would I be of greater value to the community if I was a JV coach? I mean, all those things go through your mind. I graduated two of the best athletes, two of the best players anyway, that I've had in my career. And every year I wonder, how am I ever going to replace this senior class? I mean, I had 20 guys. We were a top team. One went to Michigan, one went to Harvard. The year before that, I had guys going all over the place. How do you replace those guys? And I've just learned that, the kids that have been waiting in the wings have been working hard, and they're just waiting for an opportunity. And, I'm just excited to see how the class of 2023 responds to their opportunities that we're going to give them. So I don't know. I don't know how long it'll be. Maybe 5 years, maybe 10. If Brighton's not happy, maybe one. I don't know.
You may have to find yourself a new agent if you're going in to quit a job and you end up with more tasks and less money. I'm not sure you're the best negotiator for yourself.
Yeah, that could be very true. But I love those guys. I love the football guys. I think I model a lot of what I do from them, and I don't think you can be a successful head football coach without being really, really organized to a level that I'd never dreamed of. And I try to follow that in lacrosse. I'm not always successful. I mean, sometimes I have a plan that we never follow. The mood is wrong, or you thought you were at one spot and you say we're not there. We got to go back. It's interesting, as a lacrosse coach, I've really changed. I used to watch a lot of film of my opponents. I would watch, if I were playing you, I'd watch your last 3, 4, 5 games, and I would trade film with everybody. And I've really kind of gone away from that. I just need to see my guys. I need to figure out what my guys are doing right, what my guys are doing wrong. And I really can't, I'm never going to adjust what I'm doing to accommodate the level of the opponents that I have. So in football, it's a different story. I mean, in lacrosse, if you were to email me and say, hey, could you send me your man up plays from the last 5 games? I'd probably send them to you. In football, you've got to give up a child to get that film. Right. It's funny to me.
Well, 18 games versus 9. There are some, very apples and oranges, parts of that discussion. So and I get that part. But
yeah,
you're how old at the moment?
What's that?
You're how old at the moment? How old are you?
I'm 60. I just turned 60 in September.
You're 65. You haven't put a number on it, have you?
No, I really haven't. My wife's still working for GM. I would like to think that when she retires, maybe we'd do some traveling. I got siblings that live in Texas and Florida, and I'd like to spend more time with my family. And I've got grandkids. I got 3 boys, 3 grandkids. I got a granddaughter on the way, so I might have to get involved in the women's game. But my son Josh is going to have a daughter in January, right around the convention time. So,
congratulations. Well, listen, we wanted to just thank you for all of the input and all of the hard work you put into lacrosse. There's very few that can measure up to the effort and the volunteerism that you've brought to the table over certainly the last decade. And it's high deserving of being, inducted into the class of 2023 for the Michigan High School Lacrosse Coaches Association, and certainly very well deserved. And you're a very well liked man, and I think that goes with just all the work you've done and the kind of person you are.
Well, thank you. I'm humbled by it all. I mean, I look at all the names on that list, and I'm just grateful to have been considered.
Jim, thanks for your time.